Hello, Hainted Loves. Welcome to bonus edition of Homespun Hains. I am Becky.
And I am Diana.
And we just heard from the great Jim Harold earlier this week. We heard him talk about all sorts of stories from his own life of strange synchronicities that have happened. Mm-hmm. And Diana went down this rabbit hole, apparently researching the difference between synchronicity and serendipity, because I know a lot of times we use those words interchangeably, but apparently that is not correct. Right, Diana?
That's completely inappropriate.
Oh, no!
Correct. Yeah.
Oh, no!
Oh, no. We've been inappropriate and we didn't mean to.
Oh, yeah. We're kind of inappropriate in that episode. Sorry, Jim. Don't hate us.
We usually mean to, though.
Yeah, this time we
did talk about spermy mouth arms a lot. Sorry.
If you haven't listened to that episode, go listen to the episode we released on Monday.
Its synchronicity only explains so much.
And apparently synchronicity does not explain a serendipity. But anyway, yes.
No.
Please go listen to that episode, but listen to this first because
you're already here. Welcome.
And your brain is synchronizing up to what we have to say here. Well, Diana, I am all synced up to hear what you have to say.
Cool. So just to kind of give you like a little teeny weeny snippet of what the difference is. Serendipity is kind of defined as like a eureka moment from an unexpected source. Serendipity is one of the hardest English words to define to a non-English speaker and one of the hardest English words to translate. But it basically involves the unexpected happening upon something of interest or relevance or value, and then having the innate wisdom to recognize the relevance or value within a completely different context than what you were encountering it in, or what you were expecting to encounter the answer to some kind of problem you were pondering.
Wow.
So it's like if you're trying to develop a new drug for like blood pressure, and then some wind blows through your chem lab and you accidentally get some of this drug in your mouth, but when you taste it, it tastes sweet, and you discover the next big artificial sweetener, which is, I think, the story of how aspartame was developed.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
That's a serendipity. Like, not just, well, some accidentally got in your mouth and it just happened to be sweet, but that you happen to realize as a human being, like, oh, this has a value in a completely different context than I was expecting.
Does aspartame lower your blood pressure?
Maybe not. Maybe that's why they gave up on making it a drug. I don't know.
Serendipity is also a movie that came out in 2001, a rom-com, right? We were going to go see it as our first date with my husband. My now husband, I wasn't even a boyfriend. First date, picks me up, and he's like, I found a better movie to see, which is good because I hate rom-coms. He took me to see Waking Life, which is a very interesting rotoscoped animated movie about what really happens when you're dead and how to know if you're dreaming or not.
Oh, that sounds much more Becky.
Yeah.
No wonder you guys got married. Yeah. That's so you.
He took me to an art film. It was serendipitous that he changed his mind about not seeing serendipity.
See? Mm-hmm. There you go. That's a serendipity right there. Exactly. Mm-hmm. So something like that. The difference is serendipity, the value of the phenomenon of serendipity is in that you have a real world, real application discovery at the end of it. So the value in serendipity is the fact that you realize something could be something else and you applied it that way.
Okay.
It's not really widely thought that serendipity has anything to do with the paranormal necessarily. Whereas synchronicity is a concept that
influenced an entire Police album.
Ooh, the entire Police album. Maybe that's all it is. That's why it's paranormal. It's a Jungian term that specifically implies that there is an acausal connecting principle between multiple low probability events happening simultaneously. And that a causal principle, in other words, whatever is causing those two very low probability events, or more than two, to happen simultaneously and have some relevance between each other, the connection therein is inherently supernatural in some way.
Can supernatural mean collective unconscious? You said Jungian.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
No, supernatural just as in outside of the accepted, known ways of explaining the world.
So is this why there's always about 2 movies with the same theme that come out at the same time?
That would be a synchronicity, right? And the connecting factor, if they have nothing to do with each other production-wise or like in the world of relevance, but they just happen to come out at the same time with the same theme, that is a synchronicity. The relevance of synchronicity is not the result, like serendipity. The relevance of synchronicity as a phenomenon is the connection between the two and the deeper meaning behind the connection as like a metaphysical concept or an epistemological concept.
Epistemological. I like that word. Yeah. Remember when we tried to say that on the first episode and it came out episiotomy?
I do.
Which is not synchronous.
We're always
at
thinking
all.
about the downstairs. Yeah. That's the difference, right? It's interesting because I always kind of use them interchangeably too, but apparently synchronicity is inherently paranormal or not explained by what we assume the world is explainable by. It's not explained by that. Whereas serendipity doesn't matter why the serendipity happened to most people. They don't care why the serendipity happened. It could be a message from the universe, or the beauty of serendipity could just be in the fact that humans are able to laterally think. And we can think this thing I was expecting to be one thing, I actually found another thing that could be the thing that I'm looking for in a completely different context. And I recognized it and I used it and I applied it.
That makes sense. I have so many questions.
Do you want to ask these questions? I might have an answer.
Okay, so the abbreviation of synchronicity is sync, S-Y-N-C. As in...
It syncs up.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So whenever we talk about our audio syncing up, we're in fact using it incorrectly because there's no supernatural way that our audio is going to sync up when we're recording across 2 different time zones. Well, actually, there might be because it shouldn't sync up, and I have to do that manually after the fact.
That's the paranormal influence, is you. Are you sure you're not thinking of synchronization, which is a completely different concept?
Oh, okay. So the band NSYNC, if you can even call them a band.
The band, in air quotes.
Sorry, guys.
Yeah. Sorry, NSYNC. We didn't mean to judge you at face value.
Yes, maybe you have a synchronicity in your past. So synchronization is different from synchronicity.
Yeah, synchronization just means anything that happens at the same time. Let's speak at the same time. Let's sing, synchronized swimming, whatever things are intended to happen at the same time. Synchronicity is the slightly paranormal or unexplainable phenomena of 2 things that really shouldn't be happening ever. They're very low probability of happening, but their probability of happening at the same time is very low as well. And then their probability of happening at the same time with a similar relevance is extremely low. No causal relationship whatsoever. It's just a happenstance of 2 things that are very unlikely to happen, happening suddenly at the same time.
But if it's acausal,
no link,
then how can you say it's a supernatural cause that causes it?
That's exactly right. It's acausal. In other words, we can't explain the cause that caused both of those things to happen at the same time. And so the explanation must be, it's supernatural. Just like when Jim refers to when he's on the paranormal cruise and he's by the claw machine and his uncle has just passed and he's thinking about his uncle because his uncle would love the claw machine. And then some person he doesn't know comes by and shouts, "John, John," and it's his uncle's name. Those 2 have no causal relationship, right? You can't explain the cause between those 2 things happening at the same time unless the cause is paranormal. And it was actually John coming to talk to Jim. That's where the paranormal part comes in. It's because we can't tell what the cause is between those 2 things, why they were both happening simultaneously, and why they both had sudden relevance to Jim's late uncle. The only causal effect between the 2 must be paranormal. It must be. The only explanation is it's his uncle.
Well, you were going to give me a little bit of background on these words, right? Where they come from?
Yes. I was so fascinated because I was looking deep into the definition of serendipity, looking into the origins of the words because I'm
etymological polyglot? Goth?
Yeah. Polygoth, that's me.
Polygoth.
The origin of the word serendipity, which I had a hard time understanding the definition of from Merriam-Webster even, is because it's a complicated term. And the term serendipity is actually from a oft translated 5th century Persian fairy tale, apparently. And the word serendipity comes from the Italian translation from 1557 because it is called in Italian Peregrinaggio di tre giovani figliuoli del re di Serendippo.
Serendippo?
Serendippo is the classical Italian translation of the Persian version of Sri Lanka.
Oh, okay.
So this is actually a Persian tale about Sri Lanka.
Persian version rhymes.
I love it, don't ya? Anybody want a peanut? This word serendipity was coined by Horace Walpole specific to the tale of the three princes of Serendip.
Oh!
The tale of the three princes of Serendip. It's got everything. You're going to love it. It's got virgin queens. It's got a mage hand. It's got sexy tasting urine. It's got magic mirrors. It's got fingering. It's got oral storytelling. But most of all, it's got deductive detective work.
You use sexy and urine in the same sentence, in the same clause.
Just like the giraffes.
Ew! Okay, keep going.
Sexy tasting
Ew,
urine.
Gross. Okay.
It's a thing.
Okay, I
Okay.
just need to hear this. Continue.
This is a tale from the century. The oldest written version is in the Talmud. And then in 1302, book 1 of Amir Khusraw's Hasht Bihisht wraps up the story in an epic fable that's actually published. And then apparently somebody named Cristoforo Armeno translated it into Italian, told it to Michele Tramezzino, who in 1557 published it in Venice as Peregrinaggio di tre giovani figliuoli del re di Serendippo. And then the Italian version was translated into French, where it inspired Voltaire to write Zadig.
Oh, okay, yeah.
In 1747, starting to become familiar. And in that tale, he used a story out of the Three Princes of Serendippo, but in his version, it was using nipple tracks on the dirt to deduce that a dog had recently had puppies because he saw the nipple tracks in between the foot tracks.
Oh my God, this is so weird. Okay.
And then Zadig went on to inspire the burgeoning field of paleontology like 80 years later. The principles that were developed in this story are why we can look at a dinosaur footprint and fossil and deduce the dinosaur's nature and appearance in the same way that Zadig was able to deduce that the dog had puppies recently because he saw nipple tracks in the dirt. And then Zadig also probably inspired Edgar Allan Poe to create Si Auguste Dupin in The Murders in the Rue Morgue. So this is a really relevant story to modern fiction, especially detective fiction.
Wow.
And then, of course, Poe and Zadig both may have inspired Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes series. All of this is like, this is the seed that was planted in the 5th century for the insanely intelligent deductive detective that is the Sherlock Holmes trope nowadays.
How serendipitous.
Again, that's why it's an appropriate word.
Okay, so tell me the tale. Tell me the fairy tale.
Here's the story. In order to provide the best tutors for his sons, King Giafer, which I'm guessing is the Italian version of that name, finds the best scholars in Sri Lanka, and each scholar is specialized in a completely different field of sciences, communications, etc. And the three princes were so intelligent that they soon surpassed everybody in the land with their knowledge in the arts and sciences. But the king was a little skeptical when the tutors would brag about how smart his sons were, and so he wanted to put them to the test. He summons each son separately, and he announces that he wishes to retire from being the king and that he'd rather be a monk. And he tells each son separately, "Why don't you take over as king early, and I will be a monk for the rest of my life?" And separately, each of his sons politely refuses, insisting that, "Father, you are wiser than us. You have more experience in state affairs. You know what you're doing as a ruler. We think you should reign until your death." Every single one of the sons says this in turn separately. And the king is just like, "My boys, they really are so smart. They know that I'm the ultimate ruler and I should rule until my death. My goodness, aren't they smart?" But then he realizes they have a point. They don't really have a lot of experience in the real world because they've been coddled and so focused on their studies and learning science and logic and reasoning and communication that they really don't have any idea of how to run a kingdom. He's like, "Oh, crap. Well, they better get some idea. How do I do it? How do I do it?" So he banishes them all. from his kingdom. He's like, toss you in the deep end, you're gonna swim. It's fine.
Talk about no good deed goes unpunished, right?
Right? Like the boys are just trying to be like, no, father, you're a really good ruler. We're not. We're just really smart, but you should probably be the ruler because people respect you. And so he says, well, since you all disobeyed me and refused to become king in my stead, you're all banished from the kingdom. Get out. So the princes don't know what's going on. They're just like, well, crap. What are we going to do? They leave the kingdom on foot. And as they're wandering down the road, as spoiled, rich, smart men tend to do, they get bored. And so they start looking for Blue's Clues because they're really smart, and they're looking around and they notice some interesting and unusual things about the trail that they're traversing. And let me see if I can give you all these details and if you can guess what they deduced based on these details. You ready? So, number one, the grass on either side of the path had been torn up by a grazing animal on only one side of the road. But the grass on the opposite side of the road was greener. Number two, there were small lumps of chewed up grass in regular intervals along the road. Number three, there were tracks on the road which showed the prints of only 3 feet, but were accompanied with an occasional blurry line that went in the same direction 3 feet were headed. Number four, on one side of the road, there's a little trail of ants going along. Number five, on the other side of the road, flies alight on a shiny substance on the road. Number six, at one point they see a smear where the animal tracks are. Instead of tracks, there's a knee print. Next to the smear, they see a medium-sized human footprint next to a wet spot. One prince touched the wet spot, sniffed his fingers. They smelled like pee, but at the same time he became inexplicably horny.
Oh, gross.
Yes, this is part of the original tale. Another prince noticed the firm imprint of 2 small hands just in front of the wet spot. So what do you think happened?
Was someone doing it doggy style there and that was semen?
That's not the conclusion that they came to, but maybe.
Okay, all right. The grass on one side was chewed up, but not on the other.
But not on the green side.
On the green side. Okay. It was chewed up on one side, but greener on the other side, meaning it's somehow been fertilized. Or the grass is always greener on the other side of the road. I don't know. And then every 3 feet, you said, there was a clump of chewed up grass as if somebody had thrown it up.
Just a small clump, maybe the size of a quarter.
Oh.
I'll give you a hint. It's about the size of a camel's tooth.
Was it a sick camel that was being carted in a cart and the camel got to lean his head over one side and chew the grass? But it was a one-wheeled cart. It was like a unicycle cart. And so people had to hold the camel up on either side. And then, have you ever seen camels mate? Like they need help. I saw this on National Geographic. So maybe somebody,
help?
Yeah, it was like a whole documentary of the Bedouin helping camels mate. And they were digging a hole for the female to go into and then guiding the male on top. And the narrator was like, it makes one wonder how these creatures ever survive without human intervention. Right? So maybe that's what the small handprints were. It was just like somebody luring the camel or showing him how, this is how you do it.
So we're supposed to believe that before humans intervened, all camel pregnancies in history resulted from, oops, I was just naked and I fell on it. Like, camels don't know how to have sex? That's what we're learning?
That was what the documentary showed, but this was 20 years ago, so I'm sure since then we have gotten a little less arrogant about our interventions and maybe believe that creatures can survive on their own.
Only due to humans that baby camels exist.
Yeah, I don't know. I got nothing. I don't know why urine would make you horny unless it was some kind of pheromone.
You're right, it was pheromones. So you've gotten one part of it correct. You've gotten the fact that there was a camel correct.
Well, you gave me a hint.
What about the ants on the trail on one side and the flies on the other side?
Someone was pooping.
I don't know why that was funny, but nope, it's not poop. There's a shiny substance on the road that the flies are lighting on.
Yeah, poop can be shiny if you ate too many prunes first.
Poop off the side of a cart, a one-wheeled cart.
I mean, you got to do it somewhere. Okay, shiny substance. I'm guessing some kind of wine, date wine or something like that. I don't know why it would be there. Unless somebody was just walking and they didn't realize their jug was upturned. Or maybe it was a wine distributor and they had a hole in their barrel that they had on top of a camel that had a busted foot and that's why it was dragging.
You're pretty good for not a prince.
I am not a prince, yeah.
Or a detective novel.
And because the camel had a busted foot, it was only stopping to eat on one side of the road because it was causing it to kind of be cattywampus with the way it was walking.
Different conclusion, but I like your conclusion just as well as theirs.
Okay, so what was really going on?
So, as the princes are discussing their findings together, a man stops them in the road and says, "Excuse me, have you seen my camel? I've lost him." And in the most smug display of cleverness ever, the princes mystify the camel driver by responding, "Oh, we haven't seen your camel, but is it possible that this describes your camel? Is he blind in one eye, missing a tooth, and lame in one foot?" And the camel driver was so impressed by the accuracy that he immediately runs off down the road like, "Yes, oh good, he's come along this way. I'll go find him. Thank you, princes." And the princes travel on to the kingdom of Emperor Beramo, which I'm guessing is also an Italian translation. And as they reach the kingdom, they encounter the man who lost his camel, and he still hasn't found his camel, and he's a little bit pissed off that they sent him on a wild goose chase. And he's looking at them suspiciously like, "Wait a second. So you didn't see my camel, but you told me what my camel looks like. What's going on here?" And they reassure him, "Oh, no, we haven't seen the camel. But what we do know is also that the camel was carrying a load. On one side, a wineskin full of butter, and on the other, a wineskin full of honey. And he was ridden by a pregnant woman."
Her water broke? Is that what was the pee? Ew.
Oh, no, it's worse than that.
Was it placenta?
Worse.
What could be worse than placenta?
The description that the princes have given only serves to fully cement in the mind of the camel driver that the princes must have seen his camel and are implicit in its theft. And so he calls to a palace guard and has them imprisoned immediately for stealing his camel and reselling it to somebody with a pregnant wife. The princes are in jail. So far, they're learning a lot about state affairs because they've already encountered just one person and already gotten arrested for their cleverness. They're a little bit confounded. What do we do now? But fortunately, the camel driver's neighbor finds his camel, presumably at the home of an expecting father with wine guts full of butter and honey. And the emperor, Beramo, he summons the princes from the royal jail and he asks, "So if you didn't steal the camel, how could you have possibly described it like that?" It's very, very clear from the prince's reply that they had observed the evidence and come up with these conclusions through deductive reasoning, which, again, this is a story from the 5th century. It's kind of a new concept, right? Deductive reasoning, what is that? Well, the camel was obviously blind in one eye because he was eating only from one side, and it was the less attractive side of the road. So he couldn't see the green side of the road because he's blind in his other eye. He was obviously missing a tooth because small chunks of his cud had fallen through the tooth gap while he was chewing. And he was obviously lame, like you said, because we only saw 3 tracks and the 4th foot was being dragged. They figured that there was butter in one side of the camel's saddlebags and honey in the other because the flies were attracted to the dots of honey, but because the dots of honey flowed slower than the butter was melting, the track of ants followed the butter because it was a solid line of butter. And the flies were not attracted to the butter. They were more attracted to the honey, which was in little drips.
Okay.
And then the emperor goes, "Okay, I get all that. That's pretty obvious. But what about ridden by a pregnant woman?" The second brother, the middle brother, he says, "Well, that's really obvious. The camel must have carried a woman because near the tracks where the camel knelt down was the imprint of a medium-sized foot and a puddle of urine. And to deduce what kind of urine it was, I put my finger in the urine and I smelled it. And as a reaction to the odor, I felt a sort of, quote, carnal concupiscence." Concupiscence?
I have no idea.
This is a word I've never
You're
said
the
out loud.
etymologist.
Concupiscence. So concupiscence is nowadays, it's a Catholic kind of idea that we are drawn to carnal, sinful, lustful thoughts. And concupiscence is kind of, in the times, it's like an old school word for like
Arousal?
thirsty. He smells the urine and he's like, "Yeah, I want to do that person who peed here." Like, I don't know why.
Pregnant woman.
But the carnal concupiscence convinced him that the footprint was a woman's footprint. not to mention the pee. And then the youngest brother said, I guessed that that same woman must have been pregnant since the handprints in front of where she squatted to pee, she had to use her hands to help herself up. She couldn't just stand up after peeing. So she must have been pregnant and off balance while she was peeing, because apparently most women peeing on the road can pee without their hands. This I agree. I have peed in nature multiple times. I don't use my hands.
You can squat and get yourself up, well, depending on how pregnant you are. But no, if you're on all fours and you're that pregnant, you need help getting up.
But I guess the pregnant woman was riding the camel all alone. I don't know.
No, I mean, yeah, exactly. So if she was squatting to pee, she was just squatting. Maybe she would have to grab hold of the reins of the camel. But if she leaned over to push herself up from the ground, she's not getting up.
She's doomed.
So case in point, when I was really pregnant with my second one, I heard my toddler crying in the middle of the night. I was 9 months pregnant, and I went to go check on her. Well, the hallway was pitch black. The nightlight had gone out. And of course, I'm the one that has to get up. My husband slept right through it. So I stand up, go down the hallway to take care of her. Well, I forgot there was a baby gate there because it's near the stairs. And
oh, no.
I went into the baby gate and went over the baby gate and was there dangling, the baby gate just below my belly, and my legs dangling on one side, my arms dangling on the other. I'm sure it was really cute. And I was stuck.
We have to mention, you're not that tall.
I'm not that tall. No, I'm only 5'2".
Were you able to, with your belly against the fence, were you able to touch the ground on the other side? Or
No.
were you just like,
I was just dangling.
hovering there?
I was just suspended, like one of Vlad's impaled, like just suspended over. And I basically had to scream until my husband woke up and came and pulled me off.
I hope you went pee before that happened. Oh my
Otherwise,
gosh.
there may be a very arousing puddle on the...
Well, I like the fact that you disagree with just one of their deductions. That's hilarious.
Well, they've never been a pregnant
these
woman.
These guys aren't very experienced. They don't know much about practicality. They're all in their head and book learning, right? So they just assume that a pregnant woman would have to help herself up with her hands from a squatting position. So maybe the hands actually meant that she was peeing and somebody like hit her over the head and she fell or something. I don't know.
Or maybe someone was like, ooh, I'm so aroused by your pee. And she's like, come and get it.
Oh my. Just like a giraffe.
Sex is supposed to help you go into labor.
That part of the story has been lost to the ages because there are no full versions of this story left in print. So we don't really know if they were correct or not. But they were assumed within the context of the story to have been exactly correct. So exact, in fact, that Emperor Baramo invites them to be his guests because he believes that they are psychic and prophets and that they may be able to help him run his kingdom with their psychic antics. And they do, because no sooner do they move into the palace than they deduce that one of his counselors is attempting to poison him. Having found this evidence, this time Baramo doesn't ask how they knew. He's like, no, obviously you guys are psychic. He kills the counselor. He's so excited that he didn't die that he decides to give the princes an impossible quest.
Again, no good deed goes unpunished. Holy shit.
Right?
Poor guys.
Many have tried, many have failed at this task. But you shall succeed because you are prophets and you see the truth that is unseeable by others. And the princes are like, yeah, okay, what do you want us to do? And the emperor tells them the story of the Mirror of Justice. The Mirror of Justice is a lot like Mad-Eye Moody's faux glass. It's a mirror which, when the guilty stand in front of it, it reveals their guilt. And it causes them to grow a conscience, kind of, and confess. From this point on, I'm kind of going on my conflation of this story because, like I said, we don't have an existent version in translation right now. So we're going into Diana realm here, okay?
That's
so
okay. That's
bear
what
with me.
Oral storytelling
That's
is
what
all about.
folk tales are all about.
Yeah, they change. Yes.
So don't quote me from here on out. So the mirror was stolen a long time ago, the Mirror of Justice. It used to stand in the hall of Baramo's kingdom, and the kingdom was just. And everybody was put on a fair trial by this mirror because it revealed only the guilty, and the innocent were able to be absolved. Since the Mirror of Justice had been stolen, it was now in possession of a virgin queen of a faraway land But Baramo's kingdom is falling into chaos because he doesn't have a court system set in place because he was relying on this mirror to determine who was guilty and who was innocent. So he needs this mirror because his kingdom is just falling into entropy. So he asks that the three princes go to the faraway land of the Virgin Queen and retrieve his mirror so that justice can be restored to his kingdom. But when the princes get to the faraway land, they learn that the queen is absolutely not going to part with this mirror because it helped her solve a major problem of her own. And the princes think, well, but your kingdom never had this mirror before. Surely you have a court system in place to determine the guilty. And she said, that we do. But one day, an enormous upright hand rose up out of the sea. The 5 fingers of this hand would snatch up my subjects and bop them on the head like a pukwudgie. Or do some 5-finger exploding heart technique on them or something like that. Just basically this hand in the sea was scooping up people and killing them. Everybody was terrorized. But what they found was one day a traveling merchant came by with a special mirror, and he peddled the tale that this mirror could reveal one's guilt and therefore engage one's conscience. He sees this problem of the hand terrorizing humans, and he says, that's a human hand. Surely it shouldn't be targeting humans. It should know that it is indeed a human hand. Perhaps, and he pulls out this mirror that he's stolen. He says this mirror can show you your guilt. It can reveal your guilt and cause you to develop a conscience. And so they took the mirror of justice and they pointed it at the hand in the sea, and suddenly the hand did indeed develop a conscience, and it started picking up and bopping animals instead of humans.
Clearly it wasn't vegan.
No, not that much of a conscience. The story didn't age well in so many ways, not to mention smelling urine and getting aroused. So as long as the mirror is pointed at the hand, it doesn't terrorize the land's inhabitants who are human.
It's a continuous thing? Like, it doesn't develop the conscience and then keep it?
It's just a hand. It doesn't have a brain, so it doesn't have a memory. The mirror has to be constantly pointed at this hand in order for it not to kill humans. They tried covering up the mirror during a ceremony or something, and it started killing humans again. So they have to have the mirror on the beach, pointed at the hand 100% of the time, period. It's got to always be there. We can't get rid of the mirror. I'm sorry, you can't have the mirror back. We need it. It's keeping people from dying, princes. We obviously need it real bad.
Why not kill the hand?
Oh, many have tried and failed. It is not possible to kill the hand. But that's the impossible task of this quest, Becky. The princes, because they understand reasoning and they understand logic, what happens is, bear with me now, because this is a really old story. The eldest brother observes the hand all day and all night, and all day and all night. He observes it, he covers the mirror, he observes it coming for him, he uncovers the mirror, observes it coming back, hesitating, and scooping up a dolphin or porpoise or something like that. And he gets an idea, and he's realizing that this hand is a kind of tulpa. It is a manifest idea. And apparently he has heard from his studies a fable from long ago that 5 men, if they work in unity, can conquer the world. And this hand, the 5 fingers of this grasping hand, represent the 5 men working in unity. But the eldest prince is wise. So he vanquishes the hand by giving it another parable, because he believes that 5 men are not necessary to conquer the world. Only 2. The actions of 2 men in unity would suffice. And so to demonstrate this to the hand, he holds up his own hand with just 2 fingers. And the hand realizes that 2 fingers are sufficient. I can corroborate this. And sufficiently smote, the hand just disappears beneath the sea forever, feeling useless, never to fist again. And the queen gladly hands over the mirror of justice. She's so very grateful to these princes. And she just says, we don't need this anymore. We never needed this in the first place, except for that damn hand. You take it. That's fine. So they take the mirror back to Baramo. They're feeling all smug. They're about to mansplain exactly how they figured out this mirror's secret and how they negotiated with this mystical hand concept, tulpa. And when they hand over the mirror to Baramo, he's just like, great, thanks. Whatever. Put it over there. So the princes are like, wait, don't you want to hear the story? He's like, no. And They're like, okay, something's up. You were really, really impressed with us before we left, and we just did this really, really impressive thing, and you don't care what's going on. And they find out from the castle staff, since they left, Beramo had fallen deeply in love with a slave girl named Dilirama. Now, one day, he's taking her out, he's parading her about. She's a slave girl, so he's like, listen, honey, don't talk, just be pretty. And I'm going to parade you around as my bride-to-be because I love you and I want everybody to see you in public. And she opens her mouth. And he's like, well, that won't do. And in a typical macho king fit of rage, he had her bound up and abandoned in the forest because she was brave enough to make him look small in public. All she had to do was open her mouth. That was not acceptable. So he had her bound up by servants, and he had the servants abandon her in the forest. Night comes. He realizes he's made a mistake. He's still in love with her. And the next day, he's so filled with regret, he orders all of his kingdom to form a search party for Dilirama. Unfortunately, they found no trace.
Is that where the word delirious comes from?
Ooh, maybe. Deliriama. Maybe that's how it's actually pronounced. I was saying Dilirama, but maybe it's Deliriama.
Anyway, so he's depressed that he screwed up.
Yeah, he messed up big time. He's sick with worry because the search party, the entire kingdom is traipsing through the woods. All they find is the normal hoof prints and wagon tracks expected on the paths through the woods. He's not finding any sign of her, no sexy urine, nothing. Like, she wasn't even there. She didn't leave any footprints. There's not, like, the ropes that she was tied with. She couldn't have gotten away. There's no blood. He's so sick because he doesn't know what's happened to his love. And so he's not slept since this happened. He's sick. He's racked with guilt. He looks like he's dying. It's probably hard in the 5th century to, like, diagnose what's going on with him. But the princes know. And so they advise him, build 7 palaces in the 7 other great cities of your empire, and live at each palace for 1 week. And being emperor, he's like, done. So at each palace he visits, the princes arrange for the best storytellers in the region to be brought to tell the newest, most thrilling stories to the king every night while he stays. He's staying for 1 week at each palace. And over the next 6 weeks, Beramo's health steadily improves. Now he's merely heartbroken, but he seems to be a lot healthier. And he's sleeping better, he's feeling better, he's got a little more energy, a little more life in him. And then the 7th storyteller, the 7th palace, the 7th storyteller, tells him a story about a cruel ruler who spurns his lover and binds her and abandons her in the woods. And Beramo suddenly goes, oh God, is it me? Am I the asshole? And yes, it is. The story is indeed about him and Dilirama, or Deliriama. The 7th storyteller reveals that he actually knows Dilirama and that she still loves the Emperor Beramo despite the many logical reasons why she might be glad to give up her slave concubine victim of domestic abuse life and just live a life in this other kingdom. She still loves him, so she wants to be with him. And the two are reunited.
She must have smelled his pee.
Once you smell the pee, you never let that person go. It's a special bonding moment. Two are reunited. He gets his slave concubine lover back, and he asks the 3 princes, how did you know what to do? This is so convoluted. How could you possibly have figured this out? And they say, well, elementary. So the princes tell him they basically recommended 7 different palaces be built so that the novelty of new locations could cure his insomnia and his sadness and ennui, which they believe to be the roots of his physical illness. It was all from insomnia and sadness. I mean, that kind of makes sense. The novelty and then the bedtime stories, and he would sleep a little bit better and maybe like get out of his head a little bit and maybe be able to like secret garden, cheer up kind of thing. Because no trace of Dilirama had been found in the forest, there was no signs of animal predation, nor her own footprints, only wagon tracks. They deduced that Dilirama had been re-kidnapped and re-enslaved by a traveling merchant who was going along the road, saw this bound-up woman and was like, free woman. Cool. As you do when you see like old used things at the side of the road, you pick it up and you put it in your cart.
Oh, poor woman. Anyway, yes.
Despite the many reasons she might not want to take this guy back, she still does. So apparently they just assume she must have been picked up and re-enslaved by a traveling merchant who took her to, most likely, one of the larger cities somewhere else in the kingdom to sell or trade his wares. And presumably the princes were wise enough that they didn't tell the king to explicitly solicit information about Dilarama, because he kind of had a reputation for enslaving people and leaving them tied up in the woods to die. And so town newsies, criers, whatever, would have probably felt coerced into giving him some false leads in an attempt to spare his wrath, right? So they knew he couldn't just ask outright everywhere he went, like, have you seen this slave woman? I want to keep her forever. So they suggested instead that storytellers be summoned from afar and tell the newest, most scandalous stories to the king, just in case news of Dilarama might be received serendipitously.
Oh.
Uh-huh. You get it now, right? Yeah.
I was wondering where this was going.
This is the origin story of the concept of serendipity. And that's the story. It probably goes on to tell many other tales of the princes. But in the end, King Jafar dies, the father, and the eldest prince succeeds him as the prince of Serendip. And then the middle prince marries the virgin queen of the Fingering Nation and Stolen Mirrors and becomes king of whatever that land was. And then Emperor Barama was so impressed with these guys, he sets up an arranged marriage between the youngest prince and his daughter. There's no mention of whether his daughter is Dilarama's daughter, and that makes Dilarama the youngest prince's mother-in-law. There's no mention of that, but presumably he's an emperor. He probably has daughters by a lot of people, not just this one slave girl. But soon after the wedding, Baramo dies and the youngest prince becomes lord of his empire. So they're all kings now. They all become kings at the end. So it's a happy ending for them, because originally at the beginning, of course, if they had never taken this sojourn, they would have all had to vie to be the king of Serendip. So it's a happy ending in that all of them get their own kingdom. And they rule with deductive logic. That works for everything except pregnant women physiology.
Well, if you've never been pregnant, you don't know.
He didn't know. He just knew that was some sexy smelling urine.
Next time I'm pregnant, I'm going to pee and I'm going to sell that shit in jars.
Bottle that. Ooh,
Bottle
like
that.
vabbing.
Well, Diana, that was a very long tale with a...
That was a long and sordid tale of serendipity.
Yes, but the ending was worth it. So, thank you. Did you happen upon this tale serendipitously?
Uh-huh.
Really?
Yeah, I did. I'm Googling serendipity, and I was looking at the word serendipity, and I was like, how does this translate into other languages? And what I came upon was, it was coined by Horace Walpole based on an Italian fairy tale. And I was like, what? I had to look into that. Oh. So yes, it was serendipitous that I discovered the origin of the word serendipity in this manner.
Very cool. And that is definitely different from synchronicity.
Mm-hmm. This definition of serendipity is specifically saying, like, it may look paranormal, like the king thought that they were psychics and prophets, but actually they were just putting the clues together and deductive reasoning was born. And so serendipity is not necessarily paranormal. It could just be so far above our heads that we don't understand how somebody was able to make that connection. And so we think it's paranormal.
Very cool. Well, Diana, thank you so much. I feel very educated. I love Persian fairy tales. This was quite delightful.
I enjoyed it.
Yes.
Thank you for letting me tell you the tale of the three princes of Serendip.
And the 5 fingers of death and the placenta, not placenta on the dirt path.
You never know.
Diana, that was fabulous. Thank you so much. I feel very educated now. I know the difference between serendipity and synchronicity and synchronization. So thank you for that. I will use those words correctly from now on.
Cool.
Yeah.
I hope all of you learned something today. And if you didn't learn something, I hope at least you end up curiously smelling somebody's urine to see what happens, just in case it gives you a spooky day.
Homespun Haints is hosted by Becky Kielimnik and Diana Doty, and produced by Homespun Haints Media LLC. Editing and music by Becky Kielimnik. Show notes by Diana Doty. If you have a ghost story and you'd like to be considered as a guest for this podcast, please visit our website at homespunhaints.com/submit.